Russia has waged war against Ukraine for over 40 months, and today we'll examine the military situation there. I'm Julian Röpke, and this is BILD Situation Room. We start with the escalating situation in Pokrovsk, once home to 65,000 people. Russian soldiers, specifically sabotage units, managed to enter the city for the first time and have been present inside Pokrovsk for several days now, likely lying in wait. Ukrainian soldiers engaged them at multiple points. We have Ukrainian army footage that proves it. We can clearly observe here a patrol moving through Pokrovsk in an unarmored transport vehicle. And this patrol is now about to come under heavy fire at this corner, executed by Russian infantry troops who have successfully infiltrated Pokrovsk. These are very dramatic scenes, ending sadly with a Ukrainian soldier's death. We now see this gas station next to it. I hope it's visible on the right side. Here we now see the gas station, or rather the display for the prices back when civilians were still present. And we now see how this vehicle is being shot at, how the soldiers are trying to escape from it. And unfortunately, we also see here that not only was the one soldier wounded in the arm, but behind, as we can see here on the back of the loading area, there was another soldier sitting there who was killed by the rifle fire. Now, as we mentioned, we see the soldiers running away here. And now from another perspective, how the Russians, who apparently also monitored the whole thing, wanted to make absolutely sure that the wounded Ukrainian soldier on the vehicle was really dead. Here we see the gas station once again, the one we just saw. That means the display for the prices. Here we see the vehicle of the Ukrainians. And after it was just attacked and fired upon at close range by Russian soldiers, there is now an additional kamikaze drone strike targeting this very same vehicle. And we will also see, of course we have pixelated it as well, that the wounded soldier is still inside or on top of the vehicle, and now in the very last moment, appearing almost in the last frame of the approach. And we can then assume that he was hit once more and probably also killed. Yes, these dramatic images clearly show us that the defense of Pokrovsk has become so porous, and that the Russian soldiers are now dangerously close enough to succeed in their approach into certain points of the city, because various brigades are so heavily depleted and the city's defense is now so thin that individual soldiers likely manage to infiltrate at night, to get into the city and then during the day and, well, carry out attacks there in the hours and the days that followed immediately afterward. Why Russian soldiers are now managing to reach the city is demonstrated in this footage from Swyrov. Here we see a single Russian soldier who, interestingly enough, seems to be trying to protect himself from drones with some kind of cardboard or metal. In this case, these are Russian recordings. He's running straight ahead into the firing zone directly along this particular road. The road we're looking at here leads directly all the way to Pokrovsk. It's under 2 kilometers, then he's there. These are Russian recordings showing soldiers moved, at least partly with or without danger, of course, but still relatively freely. But in this case, we're able to move without being attacked here and could head toward Pokrovsk. We look at the whole thing on the map and see that Swyrov, as mentioned, is extremely close by. And we also want to trace the exact path that this Russian sabotage team took to get into the city. We are seeing the footage from Swyrov right now, so that's this small suburb here. We can mark it once more, and we see the orange field clearly marked by Deep State Maps, the pro-Ukrainian provider. This field stretches almost 1,000 meters away from the city, and the footage strongly indicates that what we saw earlier showed that from this road, meaning Russian units had already advanced along this street, so they probably slipped through here during the night and then infiltrated the city, and by now, for 3 days now, they've been pursued by Ukrainian forces. The defense gap has reportedly been closed again. The Ukrainian state, Pokrovsk, is fully under their control. However, there are still the soldiers who managed, as mentioned, to get in already about 3 days ago, some of whom are still in the city, even though a part of them, they mention roughly 3 to 5 Russian soldiers who were already killed. In the neighboring city of Kostiantynivka, the situation is also intensifying. We've received new footage showing that another suburb, namely Bila-Hora, has been captured by the Russian army. Let's take a look at the footage showing here from 2 days ago, Russian troops advancing through this area. We spot 1, 2, 3 Russian soldiers steadily moving forward directly into these ruins. These are Russian recordings that depict the advance rather than showing any attacks on the soldiers. These recordings are 3 days old, and now we'll look at recordings from yesterday. They show that at the northernmost edge of Bila-Hora, the flag of the Russian Federation was raised high and clearly visible. We see here now this soldier essentially risked his life twice for this propaganda stunt by absolutely wanting to show it to their own drone. We then also see that the drone essentially zooms out, providing us with a clear view of the road that heads straight toward Kostiantynivka. This is the village's northernmost edge. Now it's clearly visible. This road here heads directly toward Kostiantynivka. The smoke over there is roughly 4 to 5 kilometers away. That's Kostiantynivka. There's still one last village which is likely at least partly under Ukrainian control. That is this village. After that, the Russians would reach Kostiantynivka directly. And the entire situation is really very critical and also extremely challenging for the Ukrainians because the Russians are advancing from numerous directions at once. Kostiantynivka, we are also examining that on the map and see Bilohora, which is just one direction of advance or attack by the Russians, who in this case are approaching from the southeast. Those were the visuals we just saw. Here's Bilohora, and the outskirts of Kostiantynivka are only about 4 kilometers away. The Ukrainians are now in a very tough situation, one that is almost impossible to overcome, that they will face attacks from the southeast, the northeast, and also from the southwest in Kostiantynivka, putting them under immense pressure. We did not present the information this morning yet that not only Popiev Yar fell under Ukrainian control, but it had also ended up under Russian control entirely. But also the village north of it. That means the Russians are still pushing this wedge between Kostiantynivka on one side, and down here you have Mirnohrad and Pokrovsk, which we just saw increasingly split by the Russians into two pockets, not fully encircled yet, however, under the threat of becoming a cauldron in each of those areas. Forming there. From Donetsk in the east, we head to Zaporizhzhia in the south. Ukrainian officials report a new major Russian offensive in the area. Here, another regiment reportedly arrived, which aims to advance in the direction of, we'll first check it on the big map, toward Zaporizhzhia city at the very least. We see Zaporizhzhia, the region which is located approximately here, with around 60 to 70% under Russian control at the moment. Yet not the city itself, Zaporizhzhia with 700,000, and this region. But the Russians are currently trying to push forward here, right along the former massive reservoir of the Dnieper, which has mostly dried up after they had destroyed the dam there. The Kakhovka Dam are trying to make progress, pushing forward along that strategically vital road in the region. And from that road, we're getting various reports showing that the Russians have basically parked numerous kamikaze drones there, placed them, and are now waiting for Ukrainian units that are supposed to approach here. And on their part, the Ukrainers are trying to deal with those drones that are parked everywhere, just waiting for the Ukrainers to send logistics, meaning supplies, toward the front. Try to combat these drones. We are seeing here the roof of a gas station right along this road that we just described. We'll take a closer look at that on the map shortly. We can see a Russian drone positioned on the gas station roof, waiting for a Ukrainian vehicle to pass by to attack it. And we'll see right now how a Ukrainian drone approaches from the upper left side. Pause for a moment. At the right time, the first explosion from the drone missed by about a meter. And now the secondary explosion from the Russian drone, which was damaged just now by the blast force. Here we have these two explosions, the attacking drone and the one that was targeted, completely destroyed in that exact moment of impact. We now see another strike targeting a drone also on this rooftop. Here we see it right in front, it's lying just a few meters away. This means the Ukrainians used one drone to monitor the attack, and now they're carrying it out with the other drone. And we can also see it relatively well. This is a fiber optic drone. We can see here, I hope you can recognize it, the large coil attached at the bottom. So up here is the battery. Here we see the 4 rotors, and down there is a large coil that, of course, goes all the way back to the Russian operator. That means it likely extends 5 or 10 kilometers south to the Russian operator, who has been monitoring everything live the entire time and is ready to strike if Ukrainian vehicles approach. Probably, you can't see it exactly here right now. Is the explosive charge mounted here at the front? That means they tried to assemble it as one under the drone to have a counterweight to the battery. That means at the back is the long coil with the fiber optic cable, and accordingly the explosive charge is mounted at the front. We are now seeing the Ukrainian attack. This is from a different angle, something they have to do regularly and must repeat often. We are seeing this here. This is the only road, the only supply route to Kamyansk. As I mentioned, we'll take a look at the map now, and we can see these drones are positioned all around here. Here as well, we see it again with the large coil, the fiber optic coil underneath, and the battery on top, which are now being attacked one after another by the Ukrainian army and then exploding. Here we can clearly observe the size difference. The Ukrainian drone with the radio link is significantly smaller than the Russian one, which is waiting there because it has to carry more, requiring additional power in the propeller rotors to handle the significant weight of that large fiberglass coil. And we can see this is something that keeps repeating here. That means all along this road, the Russian drones are positioned, waiting to be deployed, so to speak. And the Ukrainians are trying, here we see it again, they are trying one after another to attack all these drones parked here for ambushes. And on this vital road heading south, they're also attempting to carry out attacks here. We let it run for a bit longer. I think we'll see 2 more attacks just to really understand the scale of it, how massive it is, how extensive it is. Again, it's really good to see here. The biggest difference is that this is the small Ukrainian drone, while this is the large Russian drone. And now the explosion that destroys both, completely eliminating the threat to the Ukrainian supply units and their crucial logistics operations, which are forced to move along this road. After this attack, we'll analyze the situation on the map, also explore why it's so critical and why the Ukrainians can't claim, yeah, we'll just go around the outside. That's absolutely impossible in this region because, as mentioned, we have a situation with the dried up reservoir on one side and heavily mined terrain on the other side, that something like this just doesn't work. We're taking a look at it now. This is, as mentioned, the part of Zaporizhia we're talking about. Here on the left, well, it's not really visible anymore, but this here is essentially, if you will, the dried up reservoir we're currently observing closely. Nothing can pass through there because it's still a very difficult terrain that, for example, vehicles can't use. We see some villages here, most of the larger ones already under Russian control. We remember Piatyshatsky and Stepov were both first liberated during Ukraine's counteroffensive in 2023, but then retaken by the Russians. Kamyansky was actually the front line until recently, roughly running along this area, but the Russians have already advanced further forward and now control almost the entire area of Kamyansk. Now moving towards Plavny, and this is Stepnohorsk, the next Ukrainian town. We can probably see this here by the roundabout and things like that. So this here is a relatively large highway that used to go from Zaporizhzhia city in the north to Melitopol in the south along this reservoir. And this key road, which we saw in the videos, is essentially the only route that leads to this area. The only road that the Ukrainians were able to use to supply Plavny and until recently Kamyansky, but not anymore. And so it's extremely important for the Russians on one side to lay mines on this road. That's relatively difficult for them. Remote mining is possible, but it's especially about setting up these drones there. The Ukrainians are doing everything they can to keep this logistics route open, even though, as we just saw, Kamyansky is currently at least 90% under Russian military control. From Zaporizhzhia in the south, we move to the northeast to the Kharkiv region, and there we also have new footage that shows us that the battle for Vovchansk, for this city, which the Russians had captured last year during their May offensive, then did not progress further, that this battle is back in full swing, that it's fully raging. The Russians are attempting to advance in Kharkiv, while the Ukrainians are making efforts to target the Russian supply lines and the troops entrenched north of Vovchansk. We're seeing this footage here of Ukrainian attacks on the Russian logistics in this region. These are partly civilian vehicles, as we can see. That was entirely civilian. That's a Buchanka again. It's basically a civilian bus that was upgraded in recent years to be used for military purposes. However, we will also witness attacks on tanks that are deeply dug into the forested area just north of Vovchansk. Here we see it, and by the way, it's relatively easy to see. So this is a fiber optic drone of the Ukrainian army, which means we have relatively good footage here. And of course, it also means that this huge jammer, this huge interference device that's mounted on there doesn't work at all against the incoming fiber optic drone of the Ukrainian army. And interestingly, we're just about to witness an attack on a hangar containing aircraft. So perhaps to start with, that's another attempt by the Russians to deploy robots. We're seeing an increasing number of Russian robots advancing on the ground, transporting ammunition and essential supplies across these areas. And we still see that the Ukrainians are fully capable of taking out the vast majority of these robots with their drone technology. Petrol was attacked, which is located in the forest. We can see that from the large fire. So it's not the drone, but the petrol stored there. The most interesting thing, I think, is, as I said, here we see it, the old military history museum, which also includes, among other things, planes from the Soviet era right here, you see. I hope you can see it. So here's essentially the main part of the plane and the two wings, one of which is already broken off here. That this hangar is now used by the Russians basically to take shelter there because it's an old hangar, because it's relatively stable, and it's located north of Vovchansk. And the Ukrainians are now flying along this wrecked plane, and now an interesting tactic. They first use the rotor turbulence of the drone to push the curtain open here and then carefully guide the drone straight into this concealed shelter where the Russians have taken refuge around the area of Vovchansk. The fighting has intensified once more. The Russian attempts to advance on the ground have grown stronger, but so have the Ukrainian efforts to stop it all with drones. We want to take a look at the whole thing on the map, and let's just let 5 seconds pass, so to speak, between the situation as it was around 6 months ago in Vovchansk and how it stands today. We see it's near Kharkiv, right? That's how it looked roughly 6 months ago, and now we're just letting time pass by. After 5 seconds, we should have the current situation, and we see, yes, the Russians have reinforced their positions. They pushed further into the orange area, so to speak, into the fiercely contested zone. However, overall, the front here continues to be completely stagnant, and just in recent days, we've observed that the Russians especially Here they advanced further into the industrial area of Wovchansk, so they are trying, the civilian area here on the right side or in the east is completely destroyed. Nothing is moving there anymore because both sides have dug in deep. However, the industrial area on the city side is still in a state where one could theoretically advance, that there are still more significant structures to be captured by the Russians if they aim to push forward. We just witnessed this specific area here transition from orange to red in real time. The old military airfield of Wovchansk, it's situated in the northern part of the city, around here, and also the hangar, which was just targeted and attacked by the Ukrainian drone. We want to look at two more videos to analyze them. The first one, an attack by the Ukrainian Air Force, specifically a MiG-29. With GBU-62 bombs, in this case, so-called JDAM-ER bombs. And that means the JDAM bombs, but in the extended range version, which can fly up to 70 kilometers. And this right here is a government building situated in Glushkovo, within the Russian region of Kursk. The Ukrainian offensive managed to capture part of Kursk, over 1,200 square kilometers of Glushkovo. It was never captured by the Ukrainians, but always considered a major logistics hub for the Russians to supply the forces further in the south. And we see here now, I believe, up to 4 GBU-62s hitting their targets, and how this building over there is completely brought down precisely by these bombs. We continue to see that the Ukrainians are active even up to, I can show it on the map, 30-40 kilometers behind the border, in order to target Russian buildings like this one and level them to the ground so that the logistics for the ongoing Russian offensive towards Sumy on the other side are at least significantly disrupted. Here we see footage from DOT. Witnesses likely from the Russian military of the house's other side, not the destroyed one. Nonetheless, we see that the Russians have essentially settled in Glushkovo and are, in this case, primarily focused on monitoring the Ukrainian attacks directed at them and specifically their administrative buildings, which of course were seized by the military. Let's take a look at the whole situation on the map. And as mentioned, we can observe Glushkovo situated very close to where the Russian army advanced further into Ukraine. So that means this red area and the orange area, that's exactly the current Russian offensive or within Sumy or within Ukraine. And Lusk up there, I just misjudged it a bit. It's only about 12-13 kilometers to the border. Nonetheless, with the JDAM-ER, you have the option to fly only down this far, so to speak, and then also to bomb Russian cities or Russian military facilities up to 70 kilometers away without exposing themselves to the danger, so to speak, without having to fly over the border themselves and thus, in theory, being detected and shot down by Russian air defense. Finally, we want to take a look at a very telling video that once again shows how crucial the use of drones has become in the skies, with drones fighting against drones, that drones ensure that drones can't shoot down other drones and so on. The whole thing is getting more and more complex and complicated. In this case, it's Russian footage, but that's not a big deal, because it's really about the core issue at hand here. We're looking at a Russian interceptor drone that's currently flying over Ukraine and actively launching an attack on a mothership, a so-called PD-2 of the Ukrainian army. We see it here relatively well with the wings and the tail unit at the back, but what's also interesting is that this mother drone is equipped to carry 2 additional FPV kamikaze drones with it, and that is likely a PD-2, which we already know, even without these Russian recordings, is capable of essentially handling the drones itself, to deploy over the target area and then visually monitor everything, as well as send signals, essentially acting as its own router, its own modem, to be active in the vicinity of the operational area of these FPV drones. And that's actually quite interesting. We have a total of 4 drones here that are moving toward each other and coordinating with one another. In this case, probably with a better outcome for the Russians at the end, although it should also be mentioned that we're seeing a total of 3 approaches here. This is the first approach here, which already hits the PD-2, but doesn't manage to bring it down or cause it to crash. Now we have a second approach, looking like it's heading straight for the propeller. Now we see it here practically going straight into the propeller. And this also doesn't lead to the crash of the Ukrainian drone, which does get a bit off balance, but then stabilizes again afterward. And now we see the third and final approach, also from the Russian drone, to this drone carrier with these 2 kamikaze drones attached below. And this, allegedly from the Russian perspective, has ultimately led to the drone crashing. We don't know that. We also saw earlier that it was rammed directly twice and it didn't do much to the Ukrainian drone. In the end, it's now supposedly been like this, whether maybe only the Russian, the interceptor, crashed here and the Ukrainian one kept flying. We don't know for sure. The key point, however, is that we witnessed 4 drones actively battling in the sky. And all of this shows us how incredibly important unmanned aerial vehicles, but also ground units, have become for both sides in this war.